Dad was able to laugh at the problems where I would want to throw up my hand and quit or cry, and Dad would laugh at them. He might have been crying on the inside, but he could hold it. He could make people feel comfortable in their troubles or sorrows. He knew how to deal with that. I think Dad would show his compassion, I think, much more deeper than I've been able to. Where I might get impatient with a drunk man. Dad understood because I never did drink, but Dad he grew up drinking, and he knew the feelings of a drunk man. He knew how to be patient with him.
Well, this was shortly after World War I, and many of the boys came back from France. And they were mad because the legal distilleries had been outlawed, and so the disproportionate number of them got into making their own and defying the law at that time. So that was one of the elements that was slightly unruly. They made a lot of noise around the schoolhouse, and a time or two rocks pelleted against the side of the schoolhouse. And Mr. Childress was a fearless man. He was blacksmith-like. He was strong as a blacksmith, and he wasn't afraid of anybody. So he soon won their respect. I remember one night he was preaching, and there was a lot of disruption going on outside the schoolhouse. And he called on the congregation he said, sing and sing loud, and sing Love Lifted Me. And that was one of his favorite songs. And I remember the lady, Mrs. Sally Spangler, who lived down the road here, she led the singing that night, and because he went outside. And we wondered what was going to happen, but they sang, and it kind of relieved the tension. And we heard a little loud, boisterous talk outside. In a few minutes, Mr. Childress came back in, and his hair was a little disheveled, and he may have had, my memory tells me, he had a little trickle of blood in the corner of his mouth. I did hear later that he laid 2 or 3 of those fellows on the ground out there and came back and resumed his sermon without missing a phrase, I suppose.
Of course, all this owners on the farm, it was hard living because you had to prepare in the summertime for the wintertime. You had to put your vegetables and grow them, put them away and bury them, have cellars and put them in there. But most everybody had plenty to eat if they planned for it in the summertime. People said they didn't have nothing to eat, but if you didn't have something to eat, it was your fault.
And he built about, I believe it was 7 churches in his life. That, in my estimation, would be a terrible job for anybody to tackle. The way he had to build them. If you'd have had plenty of money, you could have went out here and hired a contractor to build a church. Why, that'd been easy done. Anybody could do that. But if you had to beg for every cent of that money, why, it made it a different story.
When the community decided they wanted to build a church, there were quite a few people, some religious, some not religious at all, who thought it was a great thing for the community. My father was not a religious person, but he spent the summer working on the church, much to the neglect of the farm, but he thought it was good for the community to have a church here, and he personally admired Mr. Childress and became very close friend, although he never joined the church, but they worked together on the church, and then they both worked together on the new school building here. He went with my father to appear before the school board to get money to build it, and they became very, very close personal friends. And there were many other people in the community who were not religious that donated hours and hours of work Mr. Webb's father spent lots of time working with the church, and many others. He was not a religious person. There were more, actually, I suspect, working on the church who were not religious than there were religious people. That doesn't sound quite reasonable, but that's the way it worked. He had all the people believing in him and believing he was doing a good job, and he could get that out of people that wanted to help improve the community, and they all believed it would do it.
You know, he was gone a lot, and some would term it, I guess, neglected his children. Sometimes we did feel neglected. If we were having a family get-together, a few times we'd plan something, and last minute Dad would get a call, and, you know, he couldn't be there. And sometimes we were resentful of that. We'd say, well, they're hollering at you all the time, just tell them no for one time. And it seemed, you know, he just never was able to do that, but he wasn't, in the real sense, he didn't mean to neglect us. We might have felt that way. But I can remember he did try to take time to be with us. And maybe at least once a month he'd put us in the old A model car, T model to start with, but finally got up to, you know, the big time stuff, A model. He'd take us to Mount Airy, maybe at least once a month. And I was talking to the wife the other day how all of us, 10 of us, ever piled in that little old A model Ford, I never know, but he'd take us to Mount Airy, the little place called Snappy Lunch. And we get a hot dog for a nickel and a big old orange drink for a nickel. And man, that was a real treat to us. And he'd do that for us maybe at least once a month. So he tried to be a family man. But my mother was crippled, and we'd get away a whole lot with my mother, but she had a memory like an elephant, and she could tell him, you know, the things that went wrong, and he'd straighten us out when he got here, you know. But he was strictly a disciplinarian. He knew how to handle us. And he was fearful that we would take up the drinking, because, you know, we felt we had it in the genes since he was such a drunkard. But as far as I know, none of us ever drank. We might have tasted it, but we never did drink.
He was really my hero, and but I didn't unite with the church at that time. It was later when I finally made the connection. He was quite a man. I've never met one like him, and I've met lots of men in leadership positions and in high places, but he was very unusual. He was indeed the man who moved a mountain.